coming in. It was quite overwhelming, and the support from the community has been fantastic. And they freed us last night after midnight, so I think we're all happy now, coming back to reality.
You painted a very different picture when you were on the phone with us on Monday. I mean, it was pretty severe, this lockdown with the 9 public housing towers, and as I understand, all but one of those towers have now been released. That's
correct, yeah. Look, all our hearts and minds are with those people in that other tower where they're still in there. I mean, we really feel for them. I mean, we are happy but sad about the fact that they are still there, because there is a lot of negative cases, and even the negative, people are still locked down for 24 hours. So it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy at all just to be at home, and every time you look outside your window, hundreds of police officers. You have this, you can't help but feeling like, have I done something wrong? Why am I in this position? And is this going to last longer than 5 days?
So just before we leave you, Steve, to get on with your life, what about the wider issue of Melbourne now? So you've got a lockdown for, I think, 6 weeks, and you had real problems around work and getting back to your regular work.
Well, one of our reasons to leave our home now is to go to work, and to go to the supermarket and doctors and and exercise. So that means I could start going back to work, but I have cancelled all my work, and I did get a few phone calls in the last few days for work, but I couldn't obviously take any work because just didn't know how long this lockdown was going to last.
Yeah, well, all the very best to you, Steve. It's nice to hear you, and good to hear that your tower in Flemington Racecourse Road there is out of lockdown. So go well.
Thank you, Wallace. Thank you so much.
Wonderful stuff. So there you go. That's Steve Ulu there, who is out of his tower. And Building 126, Racecourse Road, Flemington there. And just seeing the news now, Victoria has recorded a massive spike in COVID-19 cases with 288 new infections recorded overnight. So doing it tough, eh?
Yeah, and that's what makes me so mad about these guys and girls doing walkabout from their quarantine. It's just like, can you imagine having to go back to level 3?
Well, can you imagine? What would the psychological effect be?
Actually, for me, I don't mind. I'd loved it. And actually, you do hear that a lot of people did. But for the economy and for people's, presence of mind and, it wouldn't be great, I don't think.
I couldn't do it again.
Really?
I couldn't. No. But to do it in a tower like Steve was in, I mean, have you seen them? They don't even have balconies. I just can't imagine if you live somewhere like that. And I live in a, proper house kind of thing.
5 days, couldn't even go in the corridors. That's right.
No fresh air.
What do they say? Half frozen packets of curry outside the door for the first day and a half or so.
And if you're a mum with no milk powder or no nappies, it'd just be awful.
A friend of mine got hold of the original Goodbye Pork Pie Yellow Mini, the one that wasn't destroyed. Don't know if it's still around. I must ask. As an Invercargill youngster, was considered the height of cool. And another text says the Crusaders by 12.
Oh,
Mike Rehu.
Pretty poor way to finish the show.
Billy Bush for Prime Minister, apparently, according to my Crusaders friends.
Nice to have you on. Everyone have a great weekend. See you Monday. I'm Wallace Chapman, 3:45. Checkpoint next.
Mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere Aki nei, another National Party MP is caught in the tangled web of COVID patient leaks. Who knew what, when, and why didn't they say so sooner? Meanwhile, party stalwart Michelle Bowe bails out altogether, blaming politics for her clouded judgment and self-destructive path. The thirst for a cold beer apparently prompts another runner from the managed isolation. The man's now isolating with corrections. A National MP linked to China's spy agencies bows out of politics even though he was rising up party ranks. Waves of junk on Fiordland beaches have locals worried. Australia pulls the handbrake on people coming home. And broken heart syndrome, it's a real thing. We've got the details.
RNZ News at 5. No mai, haere mai. Good afternoon, I'm Paul Brennan. A Queenstown man who absconded from quarantine in a Hamilton hotel last night has been remanded into the custody of corrections. Martin James McVicker appeared in the Hamilton District Court this afternoon, charged with failing to comply with an order under the COVID-19 Public Health Response Act and also with damaging a hotel television. Andrew McRae was in court.
The 52-year-old appeared via audio-visual link, wearing a mask, but it was down off his face. He left the Distinction Hotel in Te Rapa by breaking through a fence and visited a liquor store before returning. The court heard he had been difficult while in isolation over the last 10 days and had earlier been warned by the police. Remanded without plea, he'll reappear in court next week. Ko Andrew McRae tēnei.
The Health Minister has defended the management of isolation facilities, saying 3 escapes in a week do not represent a failure of the system. Chris Hipkins says a hotel is not a maximum security prison.
Just want to put this into context. Nearly 30,000 people have been through managed isolation and quarantine facilities since the COVID-19 response began, and we're talking about 3 cases here. The vast majority of people in these facilities are good, law-abiding people who are coming home, who are doing the right thing.
The Health Minister, Chris Hipkins. A High Court judge says the government needs to urgently review its blanket ban on compassionate leave for those in managed isolation. A returning New Zealander was denied the chance to say goodbye to his dying father after flying back from the United Kingdom. Annika Smith reports.
Graham Hattie was on day 4 of his mandatory 14 days quarantine when he was told his father had days, if not hours, to live. Refused compassionate leave, he began mounting a legal challenge against the decision, but his father died the night before it was due to be heard. In a minute released to RNZ, Justice Muir, who had been due to hear the case, questions the legality of the blanket ban and says the Director-General urgently needs to review it. Ko Annika Smith aho.
Australia is halving the number of its citizens allowed to return home from overseas. The Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, says a maximum of 4,000 people will be able to return each week.
The decision that we took to reduce the number of return travellers to Australia at this time was to ensure that we could put our focus on the resources needed to do the testing and the tracing, and not have to have resources diverted to other tasks.
Scott Morrison has also announced a national review of each state's hotel quarantine program. Several hotel breaches are believed to have contributed to the current outbreak in Victoria, which has today reported 288 new cases, a single-day record for the state and Australia. The National Party leader, Todd Muller, won't say if anyone else in his caucus has been leaked COVID-19 patient information from former party president Michelle Bogue. The frontbench MP Michael Woodhouse has followed the disgraced backbench MP Hamish Walker in revealing he received such information. Until today, Mr Muller has said the leak was a matter between Mr Walker and Ms Bogue and had been sorted, even though Mr Woodhouse told him on Tuesday he had been leaked sensitive information too. Mr Muller was asked this afternoon if anyone else in his caucus had been leaked information.
I've made it very clear to the caucus that if people receive personal and sensitive information, then it behoves them to ensure that my office and myself are aware.
Nationals leader Todd Muller. Nearly 30 people have been arrested in a big drug bust following a 3-month investigation and a series of raids in Waikato, Auckland and Bay of Plenty. The police say a senior mongrel mob member was among the 29 arrested. 4 meth labs in Waikato were found and shut down, while assets worth more than $1 million were recovered, including cars, loaded guns and $200,000 in cash. 16 people have been remanded in custody. It's coming up to 4 minutes past 5. Now to sport, the Southern Steel are bottom of netball's ANZ Premiership, but their self-confidence is far from dented as they again prepare to take on the defending champions and competition leaders in Auckland tonight. The Steel lost to the Pulse 47-40 on Sunday, but the Southerners led for much of the match before the Pulse took control in the final quarter. Coach Reinga Bloxham says after the initial disappointment of the loss to the players, they've realised they can compete with the best team in the competition, despite having won just 1 game so far.
We're actually looking forward to it. I feel, as a team, we felt we let ourselves down a little bit in that last quarter, so it's quite nice to be able to just go out and have another go at it and see how we go.
Steel coach Ringer Bloxham. Staggeringly, it's been more than a year since the Warriors last enjoyed back-to-back NRL wins. They had a come-from-behind victory over the Broncos last round and play another struggling side Gold Coast tonight. Inconsistency has been the focus for interim coach Todd Payton, who says he's acutely aware of the side's failure to chalk up successive wins. American sprinter Noah Lyles appeared to break the world 200 metres record in Florida this morning until it was revealed he'd only run 185 metres. In a high-tech meeting with athletes competing in different cities, Lyles smashed Usain Bolt's record. Then it emerged he had started from the wrong line. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, Anand Giridharadas has had enough of billionaire philanthropists claiming to do good, but never been challenged to do less harm. He's calling out the elite charade of changing the world. Director Max Curry on his trans celebratory drama, and Dennis O'Brien of Slowboat Records on music, his own as well as other people's. Join me, Ken Hill, tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
We're funded through New Zealand On Air. Here's the short forecast now from Met Service through to midnight tomorrow, Saturday. In the west, that's from Northland to Manawatu, also Coromandel and the Central High Country. Fine spells, isolated light showers. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Hortowhenua. Kapiti Coast and Wellington. Fine morning frosts, however, a few cloudy areas for Gisborne. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago. Fine morning frosts. High cloud for Otago later tomorrow. Buller, Westland and Fiordland, cloudy periods, isolated showers. Showers becoming more widespread tomorrow, turning to rain in Westland and Fiordland from the afternoon. Southland, mainly fine, a few light showers in the south, clearing tomorrow morning, high cloud developing tomorrow afternoon. At the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and a few showers. Just after 5:07.
Thanks, Paul, and welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. A cold beer apparently triggers another runner from managed isolation, and an MP with links to China's spy agencies calls time on politics. But first, Senior National Party MP Michael Woodhouse is the latest to be drawn into the COVID patient information leak that's already ended one MP's career after revealing he too was leaked material from National Party stalwart Michelle Bogue. Although Mr Woodhouse says the information is not exactly the same as that leaked to the now disgraced MP, Hamish Walker. Ms Bogue today announced she was resigning from the party altogether after her loyalties to National had clouded her judgment and sent her down a self-destructive path. In apparently synchronised press statements, both Bogue and Michael Woodhouse revealed he too had received inappropriate leaked information from the former National Party president. It's a tangled web of words, confession and counter-confession, with a side serving of shade. Lots of shade. It turns out Clutha Southland MP Hamish Walker was not the only beneficiary of leaked private COVID information, courtesy of former National Party president, political operative and stalwart Michelle Bogue. 4 emails landed in the inbox of National Party health spokesperson Michael Woodhouse between the 21st and 25th of June, so days before the Walker leak. Woodhouse reckons it's not exactly the same information that Walker had, but it did contain confidential details, information he regarded as inappropriate. In a press statement, the senior National Party MP describes the Bogue emails as unsolicited. Here he is earlier today on RNZ's 9 till noon programme.
I received the first information on Sunday the 21st of June following a conversation with Michelle that she had some information that could be pertinent to the COVID response and helpful to me. I happened to be in Auckland having a meeting with Sanford Plaza residents when I received a phone call saying that she may have some information that could be of assistance. She asked me for a non-parliamentary email address. I gave it to her, and that was the only contact I had with her.
So the emails went to an off-piste address, not Michael Woodhouse's official parliamentary email. The National MP reckons he did nothing with them and claims when 3 news agencies reported last Saturday that they had been leaked sensitive COVID patient information, he did not join the dots. He didn't guess that it had come from anyone within National, including Michelle Bogue, the same person who'd sent him arguably similar information.
On Saturday morning when the story broke, I texted Michelle Bogue to say for the record, I am not the source of the leak. She contacted me later that morning to say, I know you're not the source of the leak because the information is different. And that's where I left it.
Meanwhile, his leader, Todd Muller, apparently in the dark, was using the leak to criticise the government's response.
Is it a deliberate leak or is it accidental? It doesn't really matter at a level. What points to is the fact it's loose, it's shabby, and it's just a reminder that these guys can't manage important things well.
So did Michael Woodhouse on One News.
It shows that this is a shambles. The minister has to get on top of it and make sure that that very important information remains secure. Look, it's quite likely that this is human error, but there should be systems in place to prevent those sorts of errors from taking place.
By Monday, the heat was well and truly being turned up. The government announced Michael Heron QC was going to investigate the leak. The hunt was on. By Woodhouse's own admission, potentially right around the same time that investigation was announced, he hit the delete button on Michelle Bogue's emails.
When it became clear that there was issues with that information, I thought it appropriate to do so.
That was also the day that the inquiry was announced, a QC inquiry. You would have deleted it after that announcement.
I can't remember the exact timing of that, but that's possible.
That was the circumstances that caused the National Party leader to be informed of Mr Walker's actions, so it must have been after that.
Quite possibly. I think it was about the same time.
So is it appropriate for you to delete material that could be pertinent to a QC's inquiry?
Well, I mean, you can look at it both ways. Was it appropriate for me to have it? The answer is no.
About lunchtime the same day the inquiry was launched, Hamish Walker confessed to National Party leader Todd Muller that he was the leaker. Everyone fired up their lawyers, fast forward to Tuesday evening, and the dominoes fell in quick succession. First, Walker's press release confessing his political sins, followed by National leader Todd Muller's statement condemning those political sins. And then the final domino drop, Michelle Bogue outing herself as the original sinner. Remember, Michael Woodhouse is watching this play out in the full knowledge he has also received leaks from Michelle Bogue. When Todd Muller fronted the media in Ashburton the next day to announce plans for a 4-lane highway, it was bumper-to-bumper questions. But they were all about the leak.
You know, we have had one MP who made a serious error and has paid the ultimate price. Hamish Walker went behind my back. This is an isolated incident and you've got to see it through that lens.
And here he is earlier the same day on RNZ's Morning Report.
Did any of your MPs, other than Hamish Walker, know about the source of the leak prior to that?
Not that I'm aware of at all.
So you are asking the public to believe that the only people who knew about the source of this leak were Hamish Walker and Michelle Bogue, that this was some sort of rogue operation?
Yes, that's my understanding. From what I can see, that bears that out. But part of the inquiry, no doubt, will push into that arrangement between Michelle and Hamish, and we'll see what comes out of that.
Significantly, at this point, Todd Muller is fully aware another of his MPs, Michael Woodhouse, had received highly sensitive leaked information from Michelle Bogue. He chose not to volunteer that information. Here's Michael Woodhouse again talking to Catherine Ryan on 9 till noon.
We had been having a number of conversations, but the answers that Todd Muller gave to the questions he was given were absolutely correct.
So when did the leader become aware that you held this information?
I first contacted Todd late on Tuesday night to inform him that there was some information that might be pertinent to the issues that were being discussed. He asked me to talk to Amy Adams, who was our COVID recovery spokesperson, which I did on Wednesday morning. We determined that the best course of action would be to approach Mike Heron and ask him whether it was pertinent to his inquiry. The first opportunity Mike and I had to discuss things was on Wednesday evening. And then, of course, we took yesterday to decide what further action should be taken.
Let's go briefly back to that Ashburton press conference with National's Todd Muller. He's clear it was the actions of a single rogue MP, Hamish Walker, who was acting against the values of the National Party.
This is an isolated incident, and you've got to see it through that lens, and I have acted very swiftly, and we've got the right outcome. My MPs are very clear around the expectations because they represent the National Party, a fine party of tradition, of values.
To be clear about what those National Party values are, we went to their website and clicked on the link, National Party, Our Values. The response, the page you were looking for, was not found. And we did invite National Party leader Todd Muller onto Checkpoint this evening, but he declined to be interviewed. But earlier today, Mr Muller said the difference between the two situations was that Michael Woodhouse had not acted on the leaked information and had deleted the emails. And Mr Muller said he has made it clear to his caucus that if they receive personal, sensitive information, they need to notify his office. And of course, we did ask MP Michael Woodhouse to come on the programme this evening too, but he hasn't responded to our requests for an interview. Still time though, Mr Woodhouse, give us a call if you're around. Now, a man in his 50s has been arrested after he escaped a managed isolation facility in Hamilton to visit a liquor shop. He's tested negative for COVID-19 after arriving from Sydney on the 1st of July. And is the third person to break out of isolation in less than a week. Hamish Cardwell filed this report.
The man, Martin McVicker, escaped after slipping out the fire escape and cutting through ties connecting the nearly 2-metre high fence at the Distinction Hotel yesterday evening. He then gapped it to a nearby liquor shop, returning to the hotel 30 minutes later. Health Minister Chris Hipkins says the man's actions were completely unacceptable, but notes it's a hotel, not a maximum security prison.
Just want to put this into context. Nearly 30,000 people have been through managed isolation and quarantine facilities since the COVID-19 response began, and we're talking about 3 cases here. The vast majority of people in these facilities are good, law-abiding people who are coming home, who are doing the right thing.
The Brews liquor store in Te Rapa Road has been cleaned and no one went into the shop until health officials confirmed it was safe to do so. It is the 3rd time in 6 days someone has done a runner from managed isolation, and comes the day after the government announced police would be stationed at all facilities from now on. On Saturday, a woman scarpered from the Pullman Hotel in Auckland by climbing over a fence before being found nearby 2 hours later. And on Tuesday night, a man who later tested positive for COVID-19 nipped through a gap in the fence at Auckland's Stamford Plaza Hotel and shopped at a busy Central Countdown supermarket. Mr Hipkins concedes health officials failed to contact the Countdown supermarket quickly enough.
What happened with Countdown wasn't the level of response that we needed to see, needed to happen more quickly, needed to be more coordinated. Processes have been tightened up as a result of that, and you saw, as a result of the incident last night, a much faster and more coordinated response.
Mr Hipkins denies the government is restricting how much alcohol people are permitted in isolation facilities. He says hotels have to adhere to the host responsibility rules, limiting the amount of alcohol guests are allowed, and people are not allowed to have booze delivered. National Party leader Todd Muller accuses the government of bungling its management of isolation facilities.
Firstly, it was their own officials in terms of the Ministry of Health and others trying to manage it. That got exposed as being completely inadequate. Then they announced it would be completely fixed by putting the army. Now we have the police and still people are popping out for a beer.
On the streets of Hamilton today, people didn't mince words about the actions of the escapee Martin McVicker.
Disgusted, absolutely disgusted how anybody feels that they're above the law, and perhaps they don't realise that COVID is as serious as it is, but it's absolutely out of the question. I hope he goes to prison.
We've been in isolation for a bit so we could undo it, and we're doing pretty good as a country, so yeah.
We're criminals just like anybody else, treated as such. So hopefully give him a bloody good, he's fined and told how he's putting other people at risk.
Mr McVicker appeared in court in Hamilton today, charged with failing to comply with isolation requirements and damaging a hotel television. He was remanded in custody to a Corrections Department isolation facility. Meanwhile, there were 2 new cases of COVID-19 today, both in managed isolation facilities. One is a man in his 20s staying at the Sudima Auckland Airport facility, who arrived on June the 28th. The other man is also in his 20s and is at the Sudima in Rotorua and arrived there the day before. For Checkpoint, ko Hamish Cardwell-Aho.
It is almost 20 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback on anything you hear on the programme. Let us know your thoughts on that. Allegedly the third runner from managed isolation in a week. I mean, what really can we do about it? As the government says, they're not prisons, but people seem to be wandering off. And also about Michael Woodhouse, the revelation that he too received leaked information from Michelle Bowe but chose not to go public with it. He deleted that information the same day that an inquiry was announced. Let us know your thoughts. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It's the end of the political road for National Jun Yang, who has today announced he's standing down at the September election. The Auckland List MP has long faced claims about his links to the Chinese Communist Party, even accusations of being a spy. Jun Yang has also always denied such claims, but some are today questioning the timing of his resignation amid growing global tensions over China and Hong Kong. Nita Blake-Person reports.
Zhang Yang's resignation comes after 9 years with the National Party, which have been controversial to say the least. A member of the Chinese Communist Party before moving to New Zealand, he admitted in 2017 to having taught English to spies to monitor communications on behalf of the government.
Dr. Young, come on.
Yeah.
Did you know you were teaching Chinese spies?
If you
were teaching English to Chinese spies. Please, this is really important.
No, hang on.
Can we have a straight answer to this?
If you define those cadets or students as spies, yes.
Those links to the Chinese Communist Party and questions around his involvement with Chinese military and intelligence continued to plague him, but he has always denied accusations that he himself is a spy.
I refute any allegations that question my loyalty to New Zealand.
Despite his contentious past, Zhang Yang had recently been given a boost in the party rankings, jumping from number 33 to 27 on the list during a May reshuffle. Waikato University law professor Alexander Gillespie says that's unusual.
Certainly not something that would normally happen. Normally if you're rising in the ranks, it means that your fortunes are going well. And so normally people would sort of like build on that, not actually resign. That is unusual. It's unusual that he resigned when his fortune seems to be improving.
And he says the timing is important.
There's a lot of significant things happening right now internationally with regards to New Zealand and China and our relationship with them over the debate about Hong Kong. And so I think what's going on now is it's not so much about the merit of this man's placement with the Communist Party, but the way that it looks for National. You don't want to be too closely associated with any innuendo that could look bad upon them.
Canterbury University Chinese politics professor Anne-Marie Brady agrees things were reaching a tipping point.
Well, we can only ask Mr. Young what's in his mind, but I do know that the internal pressure within National was becoming acute on this issue, and the international discourse about this topic was also very intense.
But National Party leader Todd Muller says that's far from reality. He today praised Zhang Yang, saying he served as a chairperson of Parliament's Education and Science Select Committees, as well as chairing the Governance and Administration Select Committee with distinction. And he's adamant there was no pressure from himself or Nikki Kay for Zhang Yang to stand down.
Not at all. Dr. Yang has been a remarkable MP over the last 9 years, very passionate, great member of our caucus, and he's decided, for his own family and professional reasons to leave and move on to new adventures, and we wish him well.
In his resignation statement, Zhang Yang said he was proud to have been part of a caucus he believed was truly representative of the ethnic diversity that is modern New Zealand, and was honoured to represent the Chinese community in Parliament. Keen to hear more about his reflections on his political career, we headed to his Epsom office today.
I'm looking for Dr. Yang.
Yeah, no, he's not here.
Okay, do you know where we can find him?
No, he's not doing interviews.
Mr. Yang has been a somewhat evasive figure when it comes to English language media appearances, despite earning $190,000 a year as an elected official. His website claims he's a regular commentator on international and domestic affairs for local Chinese media, but just 200 metres down the road from his office, he fails to get much recognition.
Dr. Zhang Yang is resigning from politics. Do you know much about him?
Nothing.
That's it. I don't even know who that is, yeah.
Do you know who Dr. Zhang Yang is?
Sorry?
Dr. Zhang Yang, do you know who he is?
Oh, no, sorry, we don't know, yeah.
I follow the news a lot, but I actually haven't heard of him.
How about if I show you this picture? Any recognition of this man?
Can't help, I'm sorry.
Are you familiar with Dr. Zhang Yang?
Yes.
Are you sad that he'll be leaving politics?
Yes, I heard on the news.
And what do you think about his resignation?
I think if for New Zealand's future, he stay in New Zealand is good for the relationship and the business.
New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters today welcomed Zhang Yang's resignation. He said the National Party now had the opportunity to commit to not take any more donations facilitated by individuals with links to the Chinese Communist Party. Mr Yang will stay in his role until the September election. He's the third National MP to stand down from the party over recent weeks, following Paula Bennett and Anne Tolley. For Checkpoint, Nita Blake-Person.
Let's head to Australia now, and Victoria has reported a staggering 288 new cases of COVID-19, a daily record for the state and a record for Australia. There are now more than 1,000 active cases in Victoria and close to 3,500 total since the pandemic began. The state Premier, Daniel Andrews, made the announcement a short time ago. He also said the time had come for people to wear masks.
There's been a bit of debate about at what point masks become important. We think we're at a stage now, through the fact that it's relatively easy, we should request of all Victorians when they are out of their home, we're simply asking that if you can wear a mask where you can't distance, that's exactly what we would like you to do.
Meanwhile, the Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison announced this afternoon that the country would cut in half the number of its citizens allowed to return home from overseas. That would mean a maximum of 4,000 returnees per week.
The decision that we took to reduce the number of return travellers to Australia at this time was to ensure that we could put our focus on the resources needed to do the testing and the tracing, and not have to have resources diverted to other tasks.
Scott Morrison also announced a nationwide review of each state's hotel quarantine program. Several breaches in Victoria are believed to have contributed to the state's latest outbreak. He also hinted at the possibility of a travel bubble with Japan, saying it's something he has discussed with the Japanese Prime Minister. Earlier this week, Mr Morrison said it would be some time before a Trans-Tasman bubble could be established. Meanwhile, Melbourne's usually bustling streets are quiet as millions of people stay at home under lockdown. Cafes, pubs and restaurants are closed, and the Victorian government is estimating the cost of the lockdown to be in the billions. But there is good news for people living in 8 of the 9 public tower blocks under their own stricter lockdown. They can now join the rest of the city. The ABC's Samantha Donovan reports.
Melbourne's trams are running down empty streets, and away from the city, accommodation providers and other tourism businesses are suffering because many residents of the lockdown zone have had to cancel their school holiday trips. Tim Pallas is the Victorian Treasurer.
This is nowhere where any Victorian wanted to be, but it's a reality of the situation that we confront. And the obligation upon us all is to put our best efforts towards helping everybody make it through to the other side of this event.
Mr Pallas has this morning announced a new round of support for Victorian businesses. It includes small cash grants for 80,000 businesses, $30 million for the hospitality sector, mental health support, support for tourism operators and a $20 million boost for the CBD. Mr Pallas says after Victoria began to emerge from its first lockdown, he was optimistic the hit to the state's economy wouldn't be as bad as he expected when the pandemic began. But this second lockdown in Melbourne and the Mitchellshire has him reverting to the gloomy forecasts of March.
We're expecting that there will be literally billions of dollars written off the expected size of the Victorian economy. We anticipate that our unemployment rate is likely to peak at 11%. What are we, 6.9% now? We're also expecting to see gross state product to decline by about 14%. That is a profound reduction, and it will take some years before we see that level of economic activity come back.
As to whether the federal government will make its JobKeeper program available beyond the planned national September cut-off, Mr Pallas says he's in regular contact with his federal counterpart, Josh Frydenberg.
It's that September-December period, can I say, that we're most concerned about at the moment, largely because of the point at which a lot of government support is currently scheduled to fall away.
There are some happy Melburnians today. Residents of 8 of the 9 high-rise public housing towers that went into hard lockdown last Saturday are now joining the rest of the city in Stage 3 restrictions and free to at least go outside for some fresh air. 26-year-old Aman Ali is among them.
First thing what I'm going to do is to walk around, a bit of exercise and then go back home. Stretch my leg. All for the best. Finally we're free, we're out now. It was hard for last 2 days. I got used to it. They did a great job, thanks to the Australian police.
But residents of one tower in North Melbourne must stay inside for another 8 days. Many of them are patients of CoHealth, a community health organisation in Melbourne's inner west. Its GP, Bronwyn Wells, has been in the towers to check on her patients this week. She spoke to ABC Radio Melbourne.
It's a very community-minded group of people in those towers. They've lived together for many, many, many years, and they're looking out for each other. You know, these are people who have often been through a lot in their lives already, and they know about crises and surviving crises. And there's an enormous amount of resilience in this community.
And that was Samantha Donovan in Melbourne. Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, COVID cases reach a new record in the US too as President Trump appears to focus his attention on other matters. Relief in Tolaga Bay as a large sheep and cattle station is sold, not to carbon farmers. And are you feeling stressed? You're not alone. Find out why broken heart syndrome is on the rise. We'd love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, you can text us 2101, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Paul just made a small, brief cameo appearance in the headlines there now, but let's go to him now for the proper headlines. Paul.
Thank you, Lisa. The Health Minister says isolation facilities are being well managed despite 3 people absconding since last Saturday. Chris Hipkins says a hotel is not a maximum security prison and most of the nearly 30,000 people who've been through managed isolation have followed the rules. A 52-year-old Queenstown man who escaped from quarantine in Hamilton last night has been remanded in custody. Martin James McVicker was charged in the Hamilton District Court this afternoon with failing to comply with an order under the COVID-19 Public Health Response Act. A High Court judge is calling for an urgent review of the blanket ban on compassionate leave for people in managed isolation. Returning New Zealander Graham Hattie is mounting a legal challenge against the ban after being denied the chance to say goodbye to his dying father. Australia is halving the number of its citizens allowed to return home from overseas. The Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, says no one or no more than 4,000 people will be able to return each week, and they will have to pay for their mandatory isolation. Australia has also announced a review of each state's quarantine program, with hotel breaches thought to have caused Victoria's current outbreak. There are now more than 1,000 active cases in Victoria, including a record 288 new cases today, which is also a daily record for Australia as a whole. National Party leader Todd Muller has refused to say if former party president Michelle Bogue leaked sensitive COVID-19 patient information to any other MPs. Today, Michael Woodhouse followed the disgraced Clutha Southland MP Hamish Walker in revealing he received such information and told Mr Muller on Tuesday. And the police say raids in Waikato, Auckland and Bay of Plenty have resulted in the arrest of 29 people, including a senior mongrel mob member. 4 meth labs in Waikato have been shut down and the police have seized more than $1 million worth of assets. 16 people have been remanded in custody. Those are the headlines.
Thanks, Paul, and happy Friday, everybody. This is Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen, and it's time for the business news now with Nona Peltier. Nona, consumer spending, let's start with that. So this is with debt and credit cards. It's up. What are we talking numbers-wise?
Yeah, so it's not just, it's debit and credit cards that people are using, and it accounts for, I guess, about 80% of spending these days. And it's all kinds of spending, whether it's online or in a store or what have you, and it's really ticked up. It rose 8% last month, which is a fairly good hike. And what kind of things were people buying? It was sort of everything: furniture, hardware, appliances, recreational goods. Hey, snow gear. So a lot of people must be having a good time on the slopes.
Pent-up spending or savings from the lockdown, one wonders.
It's hard to know. And it's really everything. And it could be potentially pent-up demand. It could be that, people are just, hey, they're going to spend their holidays in New Zealand, so they might as well buy the things that they want to entertain themselves. It's hard to say, but surely the only thing that saw a drop in spending was fuel, and that's partly because of the price of fuel, probably more than, and people perhaps not traveling as much over some period of that, and hospitality. So there was that last to enter the level 1 lockdown was restaurants and bars. So they had restricted, they couldn't serve everybody they wanted. They had limited numbers that they could have. So that could have had an effect there. But certainly it's a big relief for retailers. But whether or not it will continue, that's another story.
Yeah, and the flow on?
Well, interesting. So the government released their books for May.
Yep.
And so that's the 11 months to May 31st. We got one more month left to hear back from the government. That's their fiscal year. Anyway, look, the official figures show the deficit is at $16 billion. Now, that still sounds pretty, it's not a small number. However, it's $1.5 billion better than the government had been expecting. And the reason why is it goes back to the spending that we've seen with consumers.
Tax.
It's GST that's driven, has helped the deficit by $1.5 billion better than forecast. So that's a lot of extra tax take there. And that really does reflect the spending we've seen on goods and services. And so the net debt that we are holding right now is steady at $78.7 billion. And that's at 25% of GDP, forecast to go to 30% by the end of June. So at this stage, it's hard to say. The finance minister said, look, it was better than forecast for sure, but he says there's still tough times ahead, and that's going to be for a lot of people. So it remains to be seen where we end up at the end of this financial year report.
But as a percentage of GDP, while it's more than those fiscal limits that this government initially set itself, it's way lower than most other international countries.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, there's no doubt about that. And so we'll see what happens. Net debt is still expected to rise to $28 billion for the year ending June 30. We don't have those numbers yet. But if this continues,
but you'll bring them to us when it happens.
I promise I will, yes.
Okay, so what about the markets? What was going on there?
Okay, so interesting. At the end of today, we had an update from MetLife Care. They had a special meeting today after the company that was going to take them over withdrew the offer. If you can remember the saga, right? The $7 offer, took that one off the table, put $6 back on the table. That's just been recently offered. They had a special meeting today. They've decided to go ahead with the scheme of arrangement, but they're still subject to an independent evaluation of the company's share value at the moment. Interestingly, the chair of MetLife Care, Kim Ellis, he doesn't like the offer. He thinks it's too light, and he says it's at the bottom end of the most recent valuation for the company, which was between $5.80 a share and $6.90 a share. Today, the company had been in a trading halt. It's lifted that trading halt, and that saw their share price rise 1% to $5.84. So it's quite a big story at the end of our day to have to digest, but there you go. That's how it's been this week.
And then where did our dollar and the market settle?
Well, okay, so we closed down about 0.5%. That was a drop of 46 points to 11,395. And once again, it was really those energy stocks were marked down, but not as much as yesterday. Yep. The New Zealand dollar is up at 65. Well, actually, it's a little bit less than it was yesterday at 65.5 US cents, 94.5 Australian, and 52.1 British pounds, which is where it's been for quite a while.
Yeah. Thanks, Nona. That's Nona Peltier with our business wrap. And sticking with the business theme, the closure of the Tiwai Point aluminium smelter has raised concerns over what it will mean for the thousands of tonnes of potentially toxic waste stored in the small southern town of Matoda. The so-called Uvia premix in the town's paper mill came under threat from floodwaters in February, and the uncertainty about its future is worrying those who live there. Our Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown visited Matoda today and filed this report.
Be responsible. Don't just pack up and run. Just put on your big boy pants and clean up your mess you've left.
That's local business owner Lynette Webb. She was shocked at yesterday's news that New Zealand aluminium smelters will wind down its operations and cease production from next August. Like many in Matoda, she's worried about what it means for the more than 8,500 tonnes of uvea premix, a waste byproduct of aluminium production, stored in the town.
There's a lot of angry people here in Matoda. Every time it rains now we think, is there going to be another flood and what impact's that going to have on our community? We had to all pack up and leave town at our own expense last time, and it's going to happen again. We're just trying to recover from COVID, and they need to come and face the community.
When the waste gets wet, it releases ammonia gas, toxic to humans. The disused paper mill it's stored in came under threat during February's floods, and locals think it'll only be a matter of time until it happens again. New Zealand aluminium smelters entered into an agreement with local councils and central government last March to remove the waste from Matoda and other sites around Southland over 6 years. But Sort Out the Dross spokesperson, Cherie Chapman, says that's not fast enough, especially now the smelter will close next year.
The environment has changed significantly. So now we've got them closing and we have serious floods in the radar. So I think they need to go back to the drawing board, get some new agreements in place. They need to move it, and they need to move it now.
Cherie Chapman says she's tried to arrange meetings with the smelter's chief executive, Stuart Hamilton, but he's refused.
We are a community group that has to have a voice in this because that waste is still sitting in sheds both in Invercargill and Matoda. We had 2 flood warnings last week in 2 parts of the Matoda River, and the community again got really anxious.
The community doesn't have a lot of faith in Rio Tinto after the way in which the material ended up in the town and has stayed since. The smelter contracted Taha Asia Pacific to process its waste, but that company moved the uvea premix into the paper mill under the cover of night and without consent. It then went into liquidation, owing the Gore District Council a $2 million bond. The council's chief executive, Steve Parry, reached a handshake deal with Mr Hamilton to expedite its removal following February's floods, but that was nixed once Rio Tinto became aware of it. But Matoda Community Board Chair, Alan Taylor, says he expects Rio Tinto to do the right thing before they leave Southland.
Tiwai's got to meet its obligations regarding that. There's already an agreement in place, and they just need to honour that agreement.
The government has the same expectations. Speaking to media yesterday, Finance Minister Grant Robertson and Energy Minister Megan Woods said they expected Rio Tinto to clean up their mess before leaving the Tiwai Point site.
That is the expectation we have. We obviously had issues with the dross. That has been resolved to the extent we now have a plan, but we will be working very closely to ensure they meet all of our expectations.
So just on the current rates, approximately half of that material should be removed from Matoda by August 2021.
Environment Minister David Parker says the government will be keeping a close eye on Rio Tinto, not only in respect to the uvea premix, but also on the clean-up of the smelter site itself.
We'll be doing everything we can to protect the public interest. We take them at their word, but we'll also be checking pretty damn carefully given how we've been let down in the past.
A spokesperson for the smelter says it's committed to its $1.75 million pledge to assist in removing the uvea premix stored around Southland, and Inalco will continue to process it as contracted. But the company says it stands by its stance that accountability for its removal and disposal from Matoda is with the Gore District Council. Checkpoint understands while aluminium production will cease at Tiwai Point next August, there will be a presence at the site for potentially years as it's cleaned up. For Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
A name change more than 20 years ago is putting the 120-year history of the horse racing in New Plymouth in doubt. The council says Taranaki Racing Incorporated has been operating illegally at its Central City site, and it's consulting on the terms of a new lease, including the option of asking the club to leave. And one councillor at least is adamant the club should never again enjoy the kind of sweetheart deal it got in 1959. Our Taranaki Whanganui reporter Robin Martin has more.
60 years ago, when the Taranaki Jockey Club found itself in a spot of bother, it turned to the New Plymouth Council for help. The council bought the land and gave the club a perpetual lease, rent-free, which included control of all buildings, the track and most of the land. It also paid the club's regional council rates bill. First-term councillor Annika Carlson says the community consultation process has glossed over the detail.
They've pretty much had a free ride at the expense of taxpayers. You know, we're covering their Taranaki Regional Council rates, and the council is covering their rates as well, which, you know, are cost neutral, but we're missing out on that revenue. And in a time of, you know, COVID-19 where we're tightening things up, I mean, that's information the community has to know about.
Ms Carlson said the previous lease smacked of the old boys network.
I would describe it as a sweetheart deal, for sure. I mean, you just have to look at the history and the facts to see that it was a pretty amazing deal that would never stand up in today's society, you know, and do we want that to continue? And I guess that's for the community to decide. And then ultimately for us councillors to decide once we've heard their views.
The Taranaki Jockey Club stepped into a legal minefield when it changed its name to the Taranaki Racing Club in 1999, essentially making its lease terms null and void. To further complicate things, the Taranaki Racing Club was dissolved in 2012 when Taranaki Racing Incorporated was formed. Its chief executive, Kerry Hobbs, says they won't give up New Plymouth Raceway without a fight.
Because we're the same club here with the same officers, the same staff, we've raced for 120 years here without much change. We believe natural justice is that we're the racing club here, and the lease that was first brought together in 1959 should continue.
Mr Hobbs says a 2008 report found racing generated $230 million of economic activity in Taranaki. He says that would be put at risk if the New Plymouth course was forced to close.
While some of the meetings could be transferred to other courses, the rugby union wouldn't take an All Black test to Stratford and Hara. That's just the way it is. We've got the population, we've got some significant racing events that happen here that wouldn't be transferred anywhere else in Taranaki.
Mr Hobbs signalled the racing club will head to the courts if any decision goes against it. New Plymouth Deputy Mayor Richard Jordan says nothing is happening immediately.
We have a view that they don't have a lease at the moment. That's our legal opinion. They have a contra view, of course, the Taranaki Racing, but we're not at war. What we've done is gone out to the community and asked them 4 simple questions about what they would think would be the best use of that land.
Confusingly, the council is seeking feedback online via a form entitled the Pukekura Raceway Survey, a name the racecourse hasn't used since 2018. Ratepayers are asked to choose between granting a forever or perpetual lease, a 33-year lease, a 3 to 5 year lease, or ending the lease completely. There were mixed views on the streets of New Plymouth today.
The regional lease again, that was the agreement they had, but I think they're entitled to it.
Well, I think we need it because lots of things have been taken away from New Plymouth.
I think the fair thing would be 33 because the New Zealand racing industry's in a fair degree of transition anyway.
I'd love to see it still going. I love horse racing and it's a great day for family.
Go on 3 to 5, paying the bloody reasonable going rate for the rates.
I just think that it should be a new lease, not the old one, but more modern. More up to date.
By Wednesday, the council had received 1,700 responses to its survey, which closes today. I ngā mutu mo te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Robin Martin aho.
To the US now, where President Donald Trump will tomorrow visit Florida, where there's been a record daily rise in the state's COVID-19 death toll. But the president isn't visiting to discuss that, or the 48 hospitals that are now completely full, or the fact that 2 11-year-old children in Florida have died from COVID-19 in the past 2 weeks. He instead wants to give a speech about drug trafficking and raise funds for his re-election. With more, here's CNN's Martin Savage.
3 states set new grim records for number of deaths in a 24-hour period due to coronavirus. California, 149, Texas, 105, and Florida with 120. Also in Florida, the Department of Health reporting today an additional 8,935 new cases, as well as their highest positivity rate for coronavirus testing in weeks.
I know we've had different, blips, and now in a higher blip than where we were in May and the beginning of June.
The almost daily record-setting surge in Florida triggering long lines of people waiting to be tested and causing officials to question the state's aggressive plan to reopen schools.
At a time when, quite frankly, restaurants have been emptied out, shuttered, it is counterintuitive to mandate students to return to school at full capacity.
Despite such concerns, Disney World opened today for pass holders. The president plans to visit Florida himself tomorrow, not to talk corona concerns, but instead traveling to Doral to talk about drug trafficking. Meanwhile, hospitals in hotspots like Florida, Texas, and Arizona, officials say are in danger of being overwhelmed with personal protective equipment again in short supply. 10,000 people are hospitalized in Texas, with the state's Republican governor calling it a massive spike.
When you look at the number of people who have been hospitalized over just the past couple of weeks, you can see that there may be more fatalities coming.
Arizona is reporting a record high spike in coronavirus emergency room admissions, on top of a shortage of ICU beds. All three Republican-led states opened early, despite the advice of medical experts to go slow. But it's not the only way politics is encouraging COVID spread. This weekend, President Trump plans to hold a rally in New Hampshire, triggering fears that the state could end up like Oklahoma, where health experts are reporting a recent jump in coronavirus cases following the president's rally in Tulsa last month, where supporters ignored advice to wear masks and socially distance.
CNN's Martin Savage reporting. South America has been hit hard by the coronavirus, and one of the first countries to suffer was Ecuador. When the epidemic swept in, local health systems collapsed. Hospitals turned patients away, bodies went unburied, and in the mayhem, some were lost. The BBC's Mike Lanchin reports from one coastal city where families desperately searching for the remains of their loved ones. Now the lockdown has been lifted.
In this small but noisy demonstration beside a main road in downtown Guayaquil, a dozen or so people are carrying homemade placards with photographs and the words, "Where is my mother? Where is my father?" scribbled in black pen. "What's happened to the bodies? We need to know," this man shouts. 34-year-old Silvia Guzman is among the demonstrators. Her husband Felix fell ill with coronavirus symptoms at the end of March, and he died in hospital on April 1st, with Silvia at his side.
After my husband died, I didn't want to leave, but they told me I had to because the virus was so strong. So I went off to do the paperwork. But when we went back the next day, he disappeared.
On her return, the hospital told Silvia she couldn't go back inside because it was full of dying COVID-19 patients.
We went to the hospital morgue. There were 80 bodies there. None of them was my husband. There were other bodies in containers outside the hospital. They were charging $100 to go in. But at that moment, we didn't have the money.
And who was charging?
Los guardias. The guards. They were only letting people in if you could pay.
Though we couldn't independently verify that claim, there were similar stories from other morgues in Guayaquil, and an official investigation is now underway. Ecuador's Pacific coastal capital hit the headlines back in late March, when videos like this one went viral. "What are you doing leaving that body there?" a woman screams as a corpse wrapped in a sheet is dumped on her street. It's like a scene from a dystopian horror movie. At the height of the pandemic in March and April, more than 10,000 people died in the province that includes Guayaquil. As fatalities spread through the overcrowded urban sprawl, the city's hospitals, morgues and cemeteries all collapsed. Blanca Moncada is a local newspaper reporter.
There were coffins everywhere. Coffins on the pavements, coffins being moved on trucks, coffins waiting to be buried in the cemetery. Guayaquil was overwhelmed by the dead.
Slow at first to respond, the Ecuadorian government sent an emergency task force to the city to collect hundreds of bodies of COVID-19 victims still at home. Jorge Watted, who was put in charge, said there was also chaos in the hospitals.
They were not so prepared, and we started making labels for them and try to help them in the labeling process so they cannot lose the identification. Even with that, they made mistakes.
For now, the worst of the coronavirus nightmare might be over in Guayaquil, but for Sylvia and the other grieving families, their anxious search is not yet over.
Sometimes I start to think or hope that perhaps he's alive because I can't find him anywhere. But then, at other times, I say no because I saw him die in my arms.
That report from the BBC's Mike Lanchin. Southern locals are worried a lack of funding for beach cleanups might result in garbage building up in Fiordland's waters. Fishing gear and plastic bottles are among the worst offenders, but more unusual items have been found too, including the Japanese driver's licence for a famous Kiwi rugby player. Locals Joyce and Johan run cleanups, but have seen funding from the fishing industry and local authorities dry up post-COVID. Despite some funding resuming, they say that if local and central authorities don't get on board soon, the problem will just get worse. Logan Church reports.
For Joyce Conk, Fiordland has always been home. She helps run tourism business Warudahiri Jet, and while whizzing around showing tourists the natural sights and sounds of Fiordland, she started to notice plenty of man-made sights as well.
We'd like to see Fiordland stay pristine, so we take people down to the coast from Lake Oroko to the sea via the Wairahiri River. And other than there being no birds, we were noticing that there was a lot of rubbish on the coast right there.
So for the last few years, she and partner Johan have been organising beach cleanups in Fiordland and Stewart Island as part of Southern Coastal Charitable Trust.
The type of litter we're seeing is mainly litter from the fishing industry, like lost fishing gear, lost crates, lost buoys with ropes on them, trawl nets, just anything associated with the fishing industry was probably our major, but it's not far behind would be domestic rubbish, like bread crates, plastic water drink bottles, just stuff like that.
And Joyce says despite the cleanups, the amount of rubbish seems to be staying the same. To quantify the problem, charity Sustainable Coastlines did a litter count at Warudahiri a few weeks ago. In just a single 100 metre by 10 metre area of the coast, 204 items of rubbish were found in one day of counting. 165 of those were plastic. Sustainable Coastlines' Sean Elise says all sorts were found.
I was actually really surprised to find a very intact piece of paper kind of floating about just on the top there. It was remarkably small and intact, so it was plasticized paper, and I picked it up and there was a bunch of Japanese characters on it, so I wasn't quite sure what I was looking at, but there was a face and a name there that was pretty familiar, and it turns out that it was the Japanese driver's license of Robbie Dean.
Joyce had more cleanups planned, one in July and hopefully another in Stewart Islands later in the year. But COVID came, and suddenly much of the funding from the fishing industry and local authorities to do this disappeared. When I spoke to Joyce today, she had just received news that some fishing companies were coming back on board with funding, who she says have been very supportive. But they are still desperately short of cash. Due to the logistics of getting to some of these remote areas, cleanups can cost north of $100,000.
We had one planned in July, and that was from the Waiau mouth around to Preservation Inlet. That was what we'd hoped to do, and my little secondary hope was that we would get funding to do a quick, short clean-up in Stewart Island on that 80 k's of coastline.
The Southland Regional Council's chairperson, Nicole Horrell, says previous funding is now no longer possible for at least 12 months due to a loss of revenue from marine fees.
Look, in the past, we have been a co-funder of their endeavours. Unfortunately, with post-COVID, we have a marine fee that's generated from cruise ship activity in around our coastline. But of course, as you'll realise, there there are no cruise ships operating at the moment, and we haven't budgeted for any revenue for that for the next 12 months at least.
That cruise ship revenue brought in $2.8 million a year. Mr Horrell says he hopes the council can help again though in the future. Meanwhile, Joy says she hopes funding can be found soon so this year's cleanups can go ahead. Otherwise,
it'll go back to having a lot of historical rubbish. It'll go back to a lot of ropes and rubbish breaking down and entering the sea. We've picked up about 20 tonne of rubbish off just the fjord and the two lower areas, and it would be heartbreaking to think we'll go back and pick up 20 tonne again.
For Checkpoint, Logan Church.
And if Robbie Deans is listening, if you're listening to us, Robbie, if you want your driver's licence back, do get in touch. We can put you in touch with the people who found it. A lot of you getting in touch with feedback about Michael Woodhouse being in possession of leaked emails from Michelle Bogue. We'll get to those after 6, so keep listening.
RNZ News at 6, I'm Paul Brennan. The State Services Minister Chris Hipkins says the National MP Michael Woodhouse failed his responsibility to come forward sooner with leaked COVID-19 patient information. Mr Woodhouse revealed this morning he'd received the information from former National Party President Michelle Bogue last month. Up to today, only one National MP, Hamish Walker, had admitted being sent patient details. Mr Hipkins says Mr Woodhouse should have come forward much sooner.
It's absolutely legitimate to call out if there has been a failure of, information handling. It is not legitimate to release that information or to sit on that information and not do anything about it.
The State Services Minister Chris Hipkins. The government says it will be ensuring Rio Tinto meets all its legal obligations as it closes down the Tiwai Point aluminium smelter. The Environment Minister David Parker says the government is already in talks with Rio Tinto over the removal of the waste product Uvea premix from sites around Southland. He says the smelter site itself will need to be remediated at the company's cost. Mr Parker says he believes the price of that work to be about $250 million.
We'll get our own advice as to whether we think that is a correct figure, and we'll be seeking to protect the public interest in ensuring that they meet their legal obligations without further cost to the taxpayer.
The Environment Minister David Parker. New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters says Parliament will be a better place without National MP Zhan Yang. Mr Yang, who announced today he won't contest the coming election, controversially confirmed in 2017 that he had taught spies in China and was a member of the Communist Party while he lived there. The List MP denied ever having been a spy or having intelligence training. However, Mr Peters says it's breathtaking National has protected him from ever satisfactorily explaining his links to the Communist Party. Anyone present at the Christchurch mosques during last year's attacks and who is now overseas will be able to apply for financial help to come to New Zealand. The government is extending border exemption criteria to enable people who were there that day to attend the murderer's sentencing on August the 24th. Sally Murphy reports.
The Chief Executive of the Ministry of Justice, Carl Crafar, says the Victim Assistance Scheme will now be available to everyone who was at the mosques that day, not just those who were shot or family members of those who were killed. The Immigration Minister, Ian Lees-Galloway, says he's mindful of application times and the limited number of flights, so work is being done to ensure people can read their victim impact statements remotely. This is Sally Murphy.
The United States has again broken the record for the highest number of new COVID-19 cases in a single day anywhere in the world. It set a record yesterday with 60,020. Today, the total is just over 60,500. The rate of infection has risen in 41 of the 50 states over the last 2 weeks, according to a Reuters tally. In Florida, a record number of 120 new coronavirus-related deaths has been reported, but the state's governor, Ron DeSantis, describes the rise in cases as a blip. Bolivia's interim president has tested positive for COVID-19. She's the second South American leader to become infected, as the BBC's Katie Watson reports.
In the epicenter of the pandemic, the virus is not discriminating. First, Brazil's Jair Bolsonaro, and now Janine Áñez of Bolivia. In a video posted on Twitter, she said she felt well and strong and would remain in quarantine for 2 weeks. The same day, another regional power broker tested positive, Venezuela's Diosdado Cabello, the president of the National Constituent Assembly and one of the most powerful politicians in Nicolás Maduro's government. He also took to social media to say he was isolating and being treated, adding, "We will win."
Katie Watson reporting there, 4 minutes past 6. Sport now. The Warriors will make a statement on the field one way or another tonight in their NRL match against the Gold Coast Titans. A fashion statement, that is, with 5 team strips for the season to choose from. Tonight they'll wear their black and yellow check bush jersey for the first time. When it was unveiled last year, one fan called it the worst jersey in the history of sport. Coach Todd Payten is more concerned, though, about nailing the club's first back-to-back win in more than a year.
It's a different jersey. I think it'll look good. I don't mind it. I don't care what colour we play. I just know that we'll be ready, whichever jersey we'll be wearing.
The Warriors sit 12th on the NRL ladder, while the Titans are 15th, second to last. The Southern Steel are bottom of netball's ANZ Premiership, but their self-confidence is far from dented as they again take on the defending champions and competition leaders in Auckland tonight. The Steel lost to the Pulse 47-40 on Sunday, but led for much of the match before the Pulse took control in the final quarter. Coach Renga Bloxham says after the initial disappointment of the loss, the players have realised they can compete with the best team in the competition. And with no fans to play in front of at the moment, the Japanese baseball team Fukuoka Hawks have come up with an imaginative replacement, dancing robots. They now have 20 of them dancing to the team song to generate some atmosphere. And that's the news.
RNZ's Black Sheep podcast is back for more dark stories from New Zealand's past, and with a special episode telling the story of statues.
They were consciously designed as propaganda, consciously designed to provide models of service for the empire.
Black Sheep. Find it on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and on the podcast and series page at rnz.co.nz.
No dancing robots, just the short forecast, taking us through to midnight tomorrow Saturday from Met Service. In the west, from Northland to Manawatu, also Coromandel and the Central High Country. Fine spells, isolated light showers. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Waitarapa, also Hortowhenua, Kapiti Coast and Wellington. Fine morning frosts, however a few cloudy areas for Gisborne. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago, fine with morning frosts. High cloud for Otago later tomorrow. Buller, Westland and Fiordland, cloudy periods and isolated showers. Showers becoming more widespread tomorrow, turning to rain in Westland and Fiordland from the afternoon. Southland, mainly fine. A few light showers in the south, clearing tomorrow morning. High cloud developing tomorrow afternoon. At the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with a few showers there. It's right on 6:07.
Thanks, Paul. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Despite giving public assurances the case was closed, it turns out National leader Todd Muller knew one of his front bench MPs had also been leaked confidential COVID-19 patient data. MP Michael Woodhouse today confirmed he too was sent private patient details from former National Party President Michelle Bogue. It comes after caucus colleague Hamish Walker's political career ending reveal on Tuesday that he had been sent the information, which he passed to the media. Political reporter Katie Scotcher recaps today's twists and turns.
National's Michael Woodhouse, the latest MP to be dragged into the leak saga, this morning admitting that he too has been leaked confidential patient information.
It was demographic details about COVID cases.
A surprising revelation, considering up until yesterday, National leader Todd Muller was telling media the leaked information was a matter between Mr Walker and Ms Bogue.
No, look, that issue is sorted from my perspective.
He was questioned further.
So Michelle Bogue has never mentioned or offered this data to you or any other National MP?
Look, I have, that's, from my perspective, that issue is concluded. She's made it very clear that there was a contact with Hamish.
But it appears that wasn't entirely accurate.
I first contacted Todd late on Tuesday night to inform him that there was some information that might be pertinent to the issues that were being discussed.
Ms Bogue sent Mr Woodhouse 4 emails between June 21st and 25th. She'd earlier contacted him to ask for a private email address and had told him she was going to send him information he may find useful. Mr Woodhouse claims to have only opened one of her emails, which he says contained sensitive information, including the names of the country's COVID-19 patients.
I did nothing with any of the information.
That was until Monday, when the government announced an inquiry would hunt down the leakers. Mr Woodhouse decided to delete those 4 emails that same day.
Because it was the right thing to do. I'd spent most of the 2.5 weeks since then out of Dunedin and really hadn't thought to delete it prior to that. When it became clear that there was issues with that information, I thought it appropriate to do so.
Mr Woodhouse informed his boss, Mr Muller, about the now deleted emails 24 hours later. He explains what he was instructed to do next.
He asked me to talk to Amy Adams, who was our COVID recovery spokesperson, which I did on Wednesday morning. We determined that the best course of action would be to approach Mike Heron and ask him whether it was pertinent to his inquiry. The first opportunity Mike and I had to discuss things was on Wednesday evening, and then of course we took yesterday to decide what further action should be taken.
But it appears Mr Muller has now given his caucus very clear instructions.
The caucus are very clear that if they receive personal and sensitive information, they should elevate it to me.
But Mr Muller wouldn't say if anyone else in his caucus has been leaked COVID-19 patient information, and he appears to be relying on a peculiar source.
That's been confirmed separately by Michelle Bogue.
As for Ms Bogue, she's resigned from the Simplicity Charitable Trust and the National Party after being a member for 47 years. She says the last few days have underscored the unhealthy relationship she's developed with politics. It's not the only consequence. She's been booted from her National Party campaign roles and earlier stood down as acting chief executive from the Auckland Rescue Helicopter Trust. Ms Bogue says the Ministry of Health sent her the patient information daily in her role at the Rescue Helicopter Organisation. As a result, the Health Minister Chris Hipkins has asked officials to review their email distribution list.
To consider whether they need to make any changes immediately, before the inquiry reports back. And then, of course, I expect that as a result of the inquiry, there'll be further recommendations that arrive from that.
The inquiry will establish what should be done to fix gaps in the system. But Mr Hipkins says in future, if members of Parliament find gaps themselves, they should first alert the government, not leak it. A tuiti whari parimata mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Katie Scott Churaho.
While a lot of you have some very clear opinions on this, you're not particularly happy with Mr Woodhouse or Mr Muller. Let's start with Ken. Ken says, my partner has a couple of shovels. She would loan them to Mr Woodhouse and Muller. They can keep digging a hole for themselves. And there's a lot in a similar vein. And this one from Leslie in Whangarei says, Mr Woodhouse was correct. He did not act on the information he received in any way whatsoever. Any person with good morals would have advised his leader that he had the information, and then the two of them should have told the appropriate authority. Leslie goes on to say, this is the second time Mr Woodhouse has put politics before the well-being of the people of New Zealand. Perhaps it's time for him to consider his future as a politician. Anne from Christchurch says, so sick of Todd Muller's dripping tap complaining about bungling. How about a bit of constructive criticism, Todd? And someone else says, I'd love to hear Mr Muller's deep thinking about how he can keep absconders in self-managed isolation. Not fronting up does indicate that deep thinking is still taking place. Come on, Mr Muller, they say, front up. And someone else says, National needs a complete clean out and stop the dirty politics. That's from Joe. Another listener says, so Michael Woodhouse, when decrying the leak, knew exactly where the leak was coming from. Michael Woodhouse is clearly a key part of National's attack strategy. I thought Muller might make National better, but now is back to pure toxicity. And Ray from Martinborough's got in touch. Hi, Ray. And says Michael Woodhouse only deleted 4 emails from Michelle Bogue when he realised that Mike Heron, QC, would find Bogue's email send file and it would show he was a recipient. Someone else says Muller's National Party is in utter shambles, resignations, dirty politics and lies. And this one's interesting. It says, it's from Barry, it says, I wonder if the reliable source that told Mr Woodhouse about the homeless person having 2 weeks holiday in an isolation facility was the same reliable source who sent him the health details of COVID-19 victims. And that goes on to say that deleting the emails surely was tampering with evidence. And Ruben's got in touch and, well, he reckons It's a bit incredulous that Mr Woodhouse didn't put his emails and the Walker emails together. He says that begs credibility. Sorry, Todd Muller, you have been dancing on a pin. It is hard to believe that you didn't know. Once a mistake, twice unfortunate, 3 times it's careless. But this list of filthy politics, deceitful answers is reflective of a tainted and unhealthy National Party culture from the top down. And just on the issue of border restrictions, this person says the border restrictions are working well. 3 escapees, all found and returned, they say, out of about 6,000, actually almost 28,000 people have been through managed isolation. Mr Muller is doing himself no favours by repeating his mantra of a shambles at the border, that listener says. Thank you for all your feedback. Sorry we couldn't get to it all. There is an awful lot of it, and much of it in the same vein. Let's go across to Australia now. It is halving the number of international arrivals it will allow back into the country to ease pressure on isolation facilities across the Tasman. The Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, made the announcement today and says all states will now move toward charging for quarantine stays. It comes as the state of Victoria records another 288 new COVID cases today. The Guardian's political reporter, Paul Karp, joins me now live from Canberra. Hi, Paul. What kind of pressure is going on with returnees? How many people are flooding back to Australia?
Hi, Lisa. So it's about 8,000 a week, but the real issue is that the second wave that's happening in Victoria was partly caused by breaches of hotel quarantine. So Victoria is diverting all its international flights to the other states and territories. And then, cities like Sydney in New South Wales were concerned that, they're carrying too much of the load of people returning and that would be a pressure on hotel quarantine. So today, National Cabinet has more than halved the number of international arrivals, which will mean 4,000 fewer Australians returning home each week.
So has there been much of a reaction? I mean, what are people who are wanting to get back home think about it? Families, friends,
Well, I've spoken to a lot of people who are in hotel quarantine at the moment who have just got in before this new deadline, this new restriction on Monday, and they're generally quite angry, particularly because the discourse in the last few days has been to blame people for not having come back sooner. Australia in mid-March said that anyone who wants to come home should come home as soon as possible. But, the points people have been making to me is that it's not within their control. People were trapped in countries where there was an absolute lockdown or they had flights cancelled, just a long litany of practical difficulties in coming home to Australia. So the idea that they were, turned their nose up at flights and chose not to come back isn't correct. And they're worried that people in their sort of situation that are now coming back from overseas or they might be doing it for unplanned reasons because of illness or death in the family in Australia are going to have to wait longer, and it's just another practical difficulty in coming home. Also, states have now decided that they're going to start charging people for the compulsory 2-week quarantine, so that's another barrier for people.
How much are they going to charge, Paul? Do you know?
No, states are yet to announce how they're going to vary that. But, they're being put up in 5-star hotels at government expense at the moment. So that could be something that's a barrier to people coming back.
So what are people saying about that? Because here in New Zealand, same situation, right? People are being put up in 4 or 5-star hotels, and it's had a bit of pushback from the public. They're quite posh, these hotels, and some of the people who are in quarantine have been posting pictures of the lovely meals they're getting. Is it a similar situation in Australia?
When compulsory quarantine was brought in, it did get a few noses out of joint, particularly with the people that had come back and paid for quarantine at their own expense before the government funding was brought in. But I think most people accept that it's a necessary step to try and reduce cases. But I've seen the photos. I've seen the photos of the food, and I'm quite happy being able to walk to the shops and cook a home-cooked meal instead of having hotel quarantine food.
Understand. We have had a couple of issues with runners, so-called runners, people who have sort of bunked out of isolation despite the fact that they know they're supposed to be there. One guy allegedly went down the road to buy himself some beers. Have you had any similar issues? Do you have people sort of trying to escape isolation?
Yes, and some of the issues have also related to inappropriate fraternisation between hotel staff and guests. They're supposed to be bringing them their meals and no more than that. But the suggestion is that staff at the hotels have had more contact with guests and have then not self-isolated themselves. So that's part of the issue that's being reviewed. There's a judicial inquiry in Victoria to look into the failures of hotel quarantine.
Paul, that's a very well-chosen euphemism.
Well, they've got a judge looking into it, so I don't know. I haven't established whether that happened personally, but one jurisdiction has had a lot of problems with hotel quarantine. But the Health Minister Greg Hunter said that the other 7 out of the 8 states and territories have done really well, and they haven't caused a second wave by letting any coronavirus cases out. So that's at least a positive that most states have got it right.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is Paul Karp, who's the Guardian's political reporter there in Canberra. And so Australia has announced today that basically halving the number of Australians who can return home. I suppose it's a version of what we're doing here, which is rationing the isolation beds to marry up with demand on those flights. It is almost 21 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Gisborne farmers are ecstatic that a large sheep and cattle station in Tolaga Bay, which has just changed hands for the first time in nearly half a century, will not be turned into forestry. Earlier this week, the Labor Party announced plans to introduce legislation limiting forestry conversions of the most productive land if it wins re-election. Our reporter Tom Kitchen sat down with the owners of Mangahea Station and asked why she rejected lucrative bids from carbon farmers.
Annette Cooper is saying goodbye to a farm that's been in her family since the 1970s. She says selling up is tough, but none of her 4 daughters are farmers.
To me, it's just a beautiful property. My husband bought it back in 1977. It's been an enormous decision to sell Mangahea. Not an easy one, I can absolutely assure you of that, not an easy one. But it was purely succession.
When the station went on the market, many in the local community feared it would be snapped up by carbon farmers. While its proponents say carbon farming will help New Zealand reach its goal of being carbon neutral by 2050, rural communities say it's destroying them by forcing people out. Mrs Cooper says forestry has its place, but not on Mangahea. She sold the high country station, about 2,400 hectares large, to the neighbours.
If you have forestry on these places, then fine, there's people around and what have you as they're planting the trees and so on. But once that's all done, all the children and all the rest of it have gone. The trucks are heavy work on those roads. And yes, it's we can live without it. We have enough trouble with the stock trucks and what have you, without logging trucks as well.
Rere farmer Kerry Worsnop, who's also a Gisborne District Councillor, says personally she was pleased with the news.
Just an immense sense of relief, to be honest, and probably a dose of gratitude towards the vendor. Definitely there was a high degree of apprehension amongst the community, and I certainly felt it.
She says the Gisborne District Council hasn't yet developed a position on carbon farming. Bailey's Gisborne real estate agent Simon Bousfield, who sold the farm on behalf of Mrs Cooper, says a property like Mangahea only comes on the market about once a decade. He's seen a big lift in forestry buying activity in the last 2 years and says that kind of money can be hard to turn down.
When there is foreign investment and when you see the level that some of these guys can go to, then it makes a decision pretty difficult from a landowner when they have to decide whether to sacrifice a significant amount of money and sell to a farmer or take that additional money and sell to forestry.
Mr Bousfield would not say who bid for the property, citing confidentiality. He would not be drawn on the selling price either, as the sale hasn't been through its final steps. That's happening later this month. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Tom Kitchen tēnei.
Donald Trump's tax returns will almost certainly not be made public before November's elections, despite the Supreme Court today ruling they should be handed over to prosecutors. The president is still angry, though, and says he's being persecuted like no other politician in history.
This is a political witch hunt, the likes of which nobody's ever seen before. It's a pure witch hunt. It's a hoax, just like the Mueller investigation was a hoax that I won, and this is another hoax. This is purely political.
The Democratic House Leader Nancy Pelosi says the court's decision is good for democracy, but not for the president.
I don't know what they're even saying about it. I hear he's tweeting one thing and then the other people are saying another. But whatever it is, it's not good news for the President of the United States.
With more on this story, here's the BBC's David Willis.
There's been huge interest here in Donald Trump's tax affairs, not least because he's been so reticent to reveal them. And prosecutors in New York wanted to gain access to those accounts because they are launching an inquiry that has stemmed from the payment of hush money to the former porn star Stormy Daniels and another woman by Mr. Trump's former personal lawyer, Michael Cohen. Congressional Democrats wanted to gain access to these records as part of a number of inquiries that they've been launching into Donald Trump's financial affairs. Mr. Trump, of course, has been resisting this. As I said, it's been going through various courts here, finally made its way to the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, which ruled today that New York prosecutors can gain access to these records, but congressional Democrats cannot. They put that matter back to a lower court. So it's a legal victory legal loss, I should say, for Donald Trump, but a political victory, some are saying at the same time.
The BBC's David Willis there. The long-serving mayor of the South Korean capital, Seoul, has been found dead after a 7-hour search. Authorities believe Park Won-soon took his own life. He'd been the subject of a sexual harassment complaint by a former staff member. The BBC's Freya Cole reports.
Stretchered out of parkland in northern Seoul, the body of a man known to many. Mayor Park Won-soon was reported missing by his daughter earlier in the day. She told authorities he had left a text message which resembled a will. His disappearance prompted a wide-scale search. Authorities traced his last phone signal and found his body.
A detailed investigation will be needed, but there was no sign of foul play so far. An in-depth investigation will be conducted.
The high-profile death has attracted mass media attention. Mr. Park had been mayor since 2011. He was facing allegations of sexual harassment, reportedly by a former secretary.
It is true that the complaint against Mayor Park Won-soon was filed with the Seoul Metropolitan Agency. It is under investigation.
Park Won-soon was a prominent human rights lawyer in the 1990s. He won one of the country's earliest cases on sexual harassment. He was also an advocate of the Me Too movement in 2018. Authorities have now moved his body to Seoul National University Hospital, where his supporters were heard grieving the loss of their leader. A post-mortem investigation will now be carried out, but his death will leave more questions than answers.
And that was the BBC's Freya Cole. There have been plenty of warnings about the impact the pandemic is having on people's mental health. Now researchers in the United States have discovered that soaring stress levels are leading to some severe physical problems. One is called broken heart syndrome, which can feel like you're having a heart attack. The BBC's Kate Gregan reports.
The COVID-19 pandemic has had a huge impact on the lives of billions of people around the world. Now, researchers in the United States have discovered that because of soaring stress levels, cases of broken heart syndrome are now more than 4 times as high. Researchers at the Cleveland and downtown Akron campuses in Ohio reported seeing a surge in the heart condition between March and April, compared with pre-pandemic levels. Cleveland Clinic cardiologist Dr. Ankur Kalra led the study.
Broken heart syndrome is also referred to as stress cardiomyopathy.
Essentially, the heart responds to stressful conditions, whether it's physical stress or emotional stress or psychological stress, and the heart responds in a fashion in which it changes its shape and it presents like a heart attack. So you would have symptoms like chest pain, breaking into a sweat, feeling nauseous, feeling short of breath.
They looked at 258 patients coming in with certain heart problems and compared them with 4 control groups before the pandemic. They discovered patients with broken heart syndrome rose from pre-pandemic rates of 1.7% to 7.8%. People with the condition generally recover in a matter of days or weeks, and the researchers found no difference in mortality rates in the patients. But as the world continues to see a surge in COVID-19 cases, Dr. Culver says it's unsurprising that broken heart syndrome is on the rise.
The pandemic is a stressful situation. It's a stressful situation for a lot of us. People have lost loved ones. People have lost jobs. There's a lot of economic distress in the community. And I think this concern is universal, is unanimous. It is affecting us in a similar fashion across the board. So we've shown that the stress in the community is high because the incidence of this condition has shot up.
Dr. Culver says that a key to prevention and treatment is reducing stress by exercising, meditating, or simply connecting with family and friends.
And the last word tonight goes to Carol. If people don't want to isolate in a nice hotel at my expense, fine, they can isolate in prison, she says. Have a wonderful weekend. We'll catch you on Monday.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. State Services Minister Chris Hipkins says it was irresponsible of National's Michael Woodhouse to sit on the fact he'd also received private COVID-19 patient details. The Environment Minister, David Parker, says the government is in talks with Rio Tinto to make sure it gets rid of the waste product from Tiwai Point aluminium smelter. Winston Peters believes Parliament will be a better place without the National MP Jian Yang, and anyone who was at the Christchurch mosques during last year's shootings and who is now overseas will be able to apply for financial help to come to New Zealand. Those are the headlines. Our next news will be at 7.
Tonight on Nights, comedian Tim Batt selects the mixtape. Country Life is on the lookout for bull, but also digging the figs. Well, harvesting them actually, especially the ones that once went into animal feed that are now being sold to humans as a superfood.